Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on this Wednesday evening. It is In Conversation with myself, Inayet, Wadee, and as we have been doing in the last 21 months, non-stop, relentless, and we have been focusing on the genocide that has been unfolding in Gaza. And tonight is absolutely no different, but also looking at another dynamic that is playing out. And I think by now many of us are aware of the meeting that and the conference that is taking place out in Colombia and the Hague group. And I've taken the cue from one of my guests and Sam Husseini, who speaks about the Hague group and talking about concrete measures, or is it a sack of cement? Now, this is a critical question that has been asked. And again, the key issue here is, are we going to see action in motion? Are we going to see sanctions? And are we going to see this genocide ending? And this is what we are talking about tonight. And we are joined by quite an esteemed panel this evening. We've got activist and lawyer Shabnam, Palesa, Mohamed, Professor Petro, an academic and also an activist, and journalist and activist Sam Husseini, as we await our guests on screen right now. I see Shabnam up there. Shabnam, assalamu alaikum and welcome to you.
Walaikum salam, Inayet, and thank you very much for this important opportunity.
Yes, and Patrick as well. Always a pleasure having you. Great touching base with you once again.
Alaikum salam. It's great to be with you from Johannesburg, University of Johannesburg, and we really are so grateful for Salam Media's great leadership in so many ways, educating, informing, and analyzing.
Thank you for that, Patrick. And Sam as well. I know you've joined us at the late hour. You know, it was at the last minute. I was informed, but really I'm elated that you were able to join us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Yes, Sam, I'd actually like to begin with you because, you know, I actually chose the topic after having read your piece that you had written with regard to the Hague group talking about concrete measures, or is it just a sack of cement? And we've seen so much of this in the past, in the last 21 months. We've seen so much rhetoric, we've seen so much talk, but we've seen absolutely no action, Sam.
That's unfortunately the fact. And I think we've seen sometimes even worse than no action. We've seen people say that the U.S. is complicit in Israel's genocide. I don't think the U.S. is complicit. I think the U.S. is a full-fledged partner. I think others are complicit. And at critical junctures, we've seen various actors facilitate this thing to be ongoing. You know, South Africa finally invoked the Genocide Convention in late December 2023. I was pushing for a country to do that throughout much of 2023, or, you know, the 3 months before that. And so many countries that were calling Israel's genocide a genocide were refusing to take that legal step. And people who are esteemed now to be forthright with you, Francesca Albanese, for example, refused to address the notion of invoking the Genocide Convention until South Africa did it. After South Africa did it, it very skillfully sought further emergency measures. And then in May of 2024, the ICJ issued its strongest emergency order. At that point, the UN Security Council should have put forward a resolution implementing those orders. It didn't do that. Algeria put aside its resolution and voted for a transparently phony U.S. resolution claiming that Netanyahu had agreed to a ceasefire, peace is at hand, hooray, hurrah, which made no mention of the ICJ orders. This was backed by various people, including Albanese. She welcomed this phony resolution, which is not to say that Albanese hasn't apparently done some good things, but at these critical junctures, The Algerians folded. That U.S. drafted resolution was passed unanimously. The Russians abstained, 14-0 to 1. And we've seen no genuine action. Compare this to other historic crises. When the Soviets put a blockade around Berlin, the U.S. did the Berlin airlift. In the 1956 crisis, faced with the British and French veto, when the British and the French and the Israelis invaded Sinai as well as Gaza, the UN General Assembly stepped up. In the 1980s, the General Assembly, faced with the US and British veto around apartheid South Africa, the General Assembly stepped up and demanded comprehensive sanctions on apartheid South Africa. This case has not fit into any of those patterns. This case has been one of unrelenting rhetoric and no genuine action by states. We're left to see activists try to get on ships to break the blockade. We're not seeing nation states come in with their power to attempt to overcome what Israel is doing.
Yes, in fact, I see we are joined out of the UK by Barrister as well, out from the United Kingdom, Brother Usman. Assalamu alaikum to you. Welcome to the show.
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me. Great to hear the end of Sam Husseini speaking there.
No, certainly. Patrick, I'd just like to obviously just touch base with you on your reading on what is playing out in Colombia as we speak right now. Because this is now the first Hague conference and a summit talking about finalizing action against the offensive and the genocide that is unfolding in Gaza. Just in terms of expectations and your reading into the summit that is taking place as we speak right now.
Well, thank you very much. And I think the crucial point, as speaking as a background researcher for the BDS movement, is finding pressure points that can be engaged not from the axis of genocide, that Sam has already said. The U.S. is a very difficult nut to crack because of the consistent way Zionism has infiltrated the very core of U.S. politics. There's, of course, Ottawa, London, there's Brussels and Frankfurt, Berlin, Paris. There's all the sort of axis of genocide sites where we in South Africa have a moral critique, and certainly the South African government deserves credit in the International Court of Justice for putting it out. Are you with or are you against genocide? But let's look at our own roles, and that's where we'd hoped today we would get a statement. Now it's too early. We haven't seen the final document from the Hague group, but we can go back to when they started and what they said, which is what we'd hoped would be activated today, is that one of the three objectives was to, quote, prevent the docking of vessels at any port within our territorial jurisdiction in all cases where there's a clear risk of the vessel being used to carry military fuel and weaponry to Israel, end quote. Now, I just point to that one out of three, and of course, others are to defend the International Criminal Court and the ICJ. But let's just say that that one is the site of hypocrisy, and it's something that a lot of us working in the BDS movement since August 2024, protesting at Glencore, the main coal company that supplies Israel, and that was in their Melrose Park branch. They actually have a Johannesburg Stock Exchange listing. That's their largest listing. Glencore's run by a man from Johannesburg, Gary Nagel. His predecessor was from Johannesburg, Ivan Glassenberg, and the main director, you might know her name. She used to be Nelson Mandela's spokesperson, Jill Marcus, and she was the Reserve Bank governor who signed our RAND bills. Now, those are the, let's say, implicated profiteers. They go back to at least 2006. Their main partner, Patrice Motsepe, the brother-in-law of President Ramaphosa, Ramaphosa himself was the main partner of Glencore before he became the deputy president in 2014. He ran the Glencore Optimum mine that became so controversial. What I'm saying is there's a big power block that keeps the coal flowing, not only from South Africa, but also Glencore and an Alabama company, Drummond, in Colombia. And I think that's the expectation we have, that the hypocrisy will end. I'm fearful that that expectation will be dashed, because even though in Colombia the cabinet has just met, and I gather from an inside source that they're very worried about that, the loopholes, as they put it, the hypocrisy. So they may close because, of course, Colombia had said we want to ban coal. But to sum up, we're worried that there's a tradition here in South Africa, we know it so well, talk left, walk right. You can make some very beautiful statements at The Hague. We know how those go over in Tel Aviv. They have two words, Hague, Schmeig. They don't care. They're just continuing and amplifying the genocide. The axis of genocide in the West doesn't care. And it is crucial to us to stop the energy. When Iran sent missiles in last month, we saw particularly a generator in Haifa port, which was oil, go up in flames. And we saw a brief interruption of a coal-fired power plant, Orat Rabin. But we really would see energy as the Achilles heel, and that means the activists who protested at Glencore last August, who protested at Patrice Motsepe's African Rainbow Minerals in May, and at the end of May also protesting at Glencore across the world for their annual general meeting. And that's what we want. That is social consciousness, anger, and activism channeled in a way that will really hit the Achilles heel. Because to be frank, we have a minerals energy complex. Cyril Ramaphosa is at the top of it, and I'm not expecting that unless we really turn up the volume from activism that we can change that.
Yes, thank you for that, Patrick. Let's just bring Shabnam into the discussion. Shabnam, Patrick talks about talk left, walk right, social activism. We see the anger out in the streets. We see the protests. We see thousands upon thousands of people obviously angry. And we see this coming through from governments. We know that many want peace. Many want to see this genocide ending. And I know, in the background, you've been doing a lot of work. You've attended many a conference. You have been networking with many people right across the entire world. And this entire focus now to end this genocide, a major shift where pressure, and Sam alludes to this in his article as well, where he expresses his disappointment at many a government not walking the talk. And I think this is absolutely important, because what we're seeing is there seems to be no urgency on the part of government, on the part of many a government, to take concrete measures and to take the necessary action that is required.
Absolutely, Inayet. And may I just say how delighted I am to be in conversation with all of you fine gentlemen. It's a robust discussion that we need, and it's beyond the platitudes and the rhetoric. It's practical action, because Palestine is not only the litmus test and a portal into the future, it is a template that the globalist cartel, otherwise known as the oligarchy or the 1%, is already using or is about to use on people around the world, in particular what we commonly call the global south. And I want to come back to Epstein towards the end of what I want to say. While it is very commendable that the work that all of us have been doing for Palestine, for Africa, for the oppressed people of the world, it's time to have, beyond time, it's overdue actually, to have a far more critical conversation. And I agree with much of what both Sam and Patrick have said. There is so much reliance on international law. And on a previous conversation, Inayet, right here on your show, one of your guests said international law is under the rubble. It was, in fact, Albert Einstein who said one of the symptoms of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different result. I have great respect for the initiative that's happening in Colombia right now. And of course, we are yet to read the declaration, the practical actions that are being talked about at a state level. And of course, we want multilateralism, we want unity. But this situation goes far beyond even that, because Israel is not real, as I call it, is openly declaring its intent to create greater Israel. And we know it's a question of the, is it the dog or is it the tail in the relationship with the US and US imperialism. They're not going to stop at Palestine. They're not going to stop at the Middle East. Africa is most certainly a target that is going to be intensified. And Netanyahu has said things like, when we're done liberating the Middle East, we're going to come to Africa next. Whether or not Trump thinks we're worthy or not is another question. But certainly we have to look at the practicalities, because of course there's always space for education. Of course there's always space for on the ground action, rallies and demonstrations. Of course there's always space for lobbying political leaders, about as far as we can get with them. But for me, the most powerful two-pronged action that we need to accelerate now is the economic, and it is the military. And Usman will speak eloquently on the subject of the military, so I'm really glad that he's joined us here. And if we look at Francesca Albanese's report, I'm really glad it's come together in a very powerful way. But these are the same actors, the same corporations that are involved in multiple human rights violations in different causes across different continents for years, decades, or even centuries. And BlackRock and Vanguard, we know, are at the top of that pile. So the questions we need to be asking ourselves is, having received that report, what are we actually doing about it? What kind of boycott, divestment, and sanctions measures are we including in our own lives in terms of our choices as consumers? But what are we demanding that other organizations, that institutions, and of course, that governments in fact employ? The United Nations is still using questionable technologies that are listed in Francesca Albanese's report, including Microsoft. So how do we take seriously the United Nations? And I speak as someone who once had an ambition of joining the United Nations and becoming its Secretary General, a subject that I discussed with Judge Navi Pillay, who said, I'm so glad you actually didn't. But it's about time we become honest about these institutions, because all they do is hold us back. They drag us back to a state of complacency, wait and see, somebody else is going to do it. And if you watch those press conferences at the UN, it's platitudes, it's euphemisms. There are no direct answers. What that does tell us is that is not real, and imperialism, as exemplified by the US and other governments, and not people, people are not their governments, governments are not their people, is that the tactics used by this cabal, including blackmail, intimidation, and bribery, continue to run the roost. In fact, I believe there's a panel that's just resigned from the UN very quietly that was in fact investigating, or a part of investigations around is not real's activities. We also know about various sanctions. We know there's a Hague Act which gives the US authority, as if they needed an act to do that, to invade the Hague should any decisions be made against US officials or their allies. So we really have to ask ourselves whether this consummate belief in international law, is it helping us, or is it in fact holding us back? Because Palestine is not the end. It is just the beginning of an onslaught of humanity on an existential level. And I also want to state very clearly that some of the violent and oppressive measures being used against Palestinians, the concentration camps, the constant surveillance, the digital ID, the fact that they're going to be forced to engage in all sorts of activities and orders in exchange for food, as we're already seeing, is of course worse than what was experienced during the Holocaust. And there are Jewish survivors of the Holocaust who say exactly that. Are we ready to be treated exactly the same way? Is it impossible that the same could happen in our countries? Absolutely not. As Patrick said, the president of South Africa's brother-in-law is involved and implicated in the sale of coal to Is Not Real, fueling the genocide. So as I've said before, it's wonderful. It's great that we've been to the ICJ as a nation. But it is far more difficult to cut those diplomatic ties, to cut those economic ties, and to support military intervention. And with that being said, I just want to be very clear that I absolutely support military intervention. And I have to ask the question, why has it taken us so long to start to talk about concrete measures? Thank you, Inayet.
Thank you for that, Shabnam. And as you correctly pointed out, Palestine being a litmus test, but also in terms of determining what a new world order would look like. And I think we're starting to see a lot of that playing out. And just to bring Osman into the discussion now, Osman, when one looks at even Francesca Albanese, for example, one of the reasons why sanctions have now been placed on her is because she's gone against the giants. Shabnam spoke about the tech giants. She's gone against the finance sector, the banking sector, the military-industrial complex, which is all powerful. And I know Shabnam said, yeah, requested that you obviously comment on the military aspect. And just to look at, your take and your analysis on how you see this entire thing playing out militarily as well, and just to unpack some of the issues that come to mind, Osman.
Thank you. Yes, well, I firstly very much appreciate your analysis, Shabnam. I think I agreed and was nodding my head at virtually everything you said. The world is now waking up to how much of an illusion the UN is. It is essentially a comfort blanket for people in power to defer a sense of responsibility, a sense of accountability, to prevent them from actually doing what's needed. They kick it back to the UN. I say this as someone who was a lobbyist at the United Nations for 5 years, and that was my job, right? A cheerleader at the UN to cheerlead disarmament processes, and I spoke with ambassadors and ministers on international law. And the wake-up call for me, perhaps I was a canary down the coal mine, but the wake-up call for me was I was at the General Assembly in New York on the 7th of October 2023, and saw the Israeli ambassador in the room describe the Palestinians as animals, and looked around the room and saw all of the diplomats and the humanitarian disarmament folk nod along. No pushback. There was a beating of the drum of war. All of these colleagues who had been speaking about international law, international humanitarian law, were just going to beat the drum of war and disregard what was about to be an inevitable genocide. I think anyone who knew about the history, knows anything about the history of Israel and Palestine, knew after 7th of October that was going to be used as a justification for genocide. Anyway, I digress. I want to really talk about how we really pierce through this fog. We are now realizing that the UN is a facade, international law is a facade, but what then do we do about that? It is obvious that Israel is ideologically committed to genocide. It is intent on extermination. It has all of the resources that it needs to finish the job. We know Israel's character. I talk about the character of the state. It does not see the Palestinians as human beings, and we've been watching it for 22 months, the extermination. It is shocking to me that I have been talking about military intervention as my daily job for hundreds of hours every day for about 20 months. And it's actually, a lot of the time, Palestine supporters, people in the Palestine camp, that are the most difficult, because they have not let go of the illusion that the UN or international law is going to do something, and they just haven't got that. Maybe they're realizing it. But all of these efforts to have, and this is where Sam Husseini, I know that you've been advocating for a resolution in the UNGA for a protective force. I say this because what will happen, I know that this will happen, even if hypothetically there was a resolution, it would be discredited. The states would discredit it. The very states that voted for it will discredit it because it's not legally binding. And they will, again, we will have months and months of backwards and forwardsing about whether or not that resolution has any effect. Meanwhile, the genocide will be done, right? So what I've been advocating for is to say we don't need a resolution, we don't need a Security Council, anything. It should have happened now. Every state has, any state, big or small, has the legal, moral authority to go today and implement a no-fly zone. Get that aid. There's hundreds of trucks of aid at the border, and there's children starving to death. It's common sense that aid needs to go in. That wall needs to break. So there has to be a military intervention in Israel. We know is not going to stop. There has to be a military intervention. I've been preaching this from the top of my lungs for so long, but it is actually most difficult with Palestine supporters because they think that this is a violent thing to be asking for. And they say, oh, you're preaching violence, we're against violence. You cannot have a tolerant society where you have a state committed to destroying it. It has to be dismantled. And there is no other way to do that other than by dismantling it. There has to be an army that goes and destroys the parliament building at some point. If we're talking about a two-state, one-state, whatever it is, that has to end. So all I'm now talking about is the need for military intervention. I'm having the same problem because one of the hardships I have is the only legal way for me to advocate for this is for me to talk about states taking action, because states do have the legal right. But again, states aren't going to do this. So there's going to come a point where there will be the moral, legal case for the military intervention, and it will be done by entities other than states. But I won't be advocating for that, as I'll get arrested. Anyway, I'm speaking very straightforwardly at this point. I used to be much more, I don't know, careful about protecting the law. But I spent 12 years as a barrister advocating for the law, defending the rule of law, defending refugees, and then as an international law kind of expert. It's all nonsense. It's a lie. They're going to kill everyone. That's all we need to know. There we go. I'll stop here.
Okay, thanks for that, Osman. Sam, just coming back to you, and one can call it an illusion, one can call it a facade, and Osman obviously talks about military intervention, but we've seen obviously legal interventions yielding absolutely no results. South Africa's case to the ICJ. In fact, things have gotten actually worse. But again, coming back to what is playing out in Colombia as we speak right now. And in your piece that you've written as well, you single out a lot of these countries, the lack of political will, where on the one side, obviously, you've got this case, the support is there, you want to end this genocide, but listening to Patrick's talking about Glencoe, talking about many a country, the political will to cut firstly diplomatic ties before we even talk about military intervention, diplomatic ties, economic ties, sanctioning Israel. And you single all of this out, and you also single, Sam, you single a number of countries that lack this political will.
Absolutely. And let me just say how much I appreciate this discussion from all of the participants. This is probably the most the best discussion I've been involved with in quite a while. I've often thought, I haven't written about this, that the analogy of what I've witnessed over the last 20 plus months in terms of the legal process is when people say international law doesn't work, maybe not, but to take an analogy to armed struggle, and I'll address armed struggle in a moment, but just as an analogy, if you pull a pin from a grenade and you hold onto the grenade and you throw a pin, that doesn't mean that armed struggle is useless. That means you're not doing it right. That's why at the beginning of my comments, I signaled my distress at how long it took the Genocide Convention to be invoked. I first suggested invoking it in 2014 during the Israeli slaughter at that point. And I chronicled all of these countries saying that what Israel was doing then in 2014 was genocide. But none of them would invoke the Genocide Convention. Perhaps because the Palestinian delegation to the UN didn't seem, which is basically a hostage to the US and Israel, didn't want them to. And then when the ICJ finally issued orders in May, the Algerians reportedly drafted a resolution to implement that, and then they put it aside, and they voted for this phony US resolution, with Biden going out there and saying Netanyahu's agreed to a ceasefire. If Netanyahu agreed to a ceasefire, why the hell isn't he saying he agreed to a ceasefire? Why is Biden saying it? And everybody went along with it. At that point, there should have been a movement to compel these states to at least put that resolution to a vote at the UN and let the US veto it. If these states had any capacity, they would let the US veto a resolution every week, and then build up as part of a comprehensive strategy of building up the international support for measures that could actually remedy the situation. To forthrightly deal with this issue of armed struggle, I mean, the Palestinian people have a legal right to armed struggle. They are under occupation. The question then becomes one of wisdom. Mubarak Awad, a longtime nonviolent activist, his aphorism was, if your opponent is Mike Tyson, maybe challenge him to something other than boxing, maybe a chess match. Israel is a nuclear power. That Epstein and AIPAC isn't the only blackmail that Israel exercises. There's a substantial case that they are exercising, including against the US, nuclear blackmail, that they basically say, do what we, back us up or we're going to go nuclear here. That is apparently what they did in 1973. The impetus for Israel's nuclear weapons capacity, as I understand it, began right after 1956, which I referenced, 1956, the Suez Crisis, when Eisenhower teamed up with the Soviet Union to get the traditional colonial powers, Britain and France, and Israel, to withdraw from Sinai and Gaza. So I think that I'm not a complete pacifist. John Brown in the U.S. context is someone who used violence to righteous ends. But I think it needs to be part of an overall strategy. And I think that the legal things need to be pushed as much as possible. Hypocrisy needs to be called out as much as possible. Hezbollah and which has sustained substantial damage, and Nasrallah in Yemen have obviously engaged militarily, as has Iran, with, I think, mixed results. I don't know what nation states could do. I mean, the hypocrisies are multifold. I mean, Turkey is perfectly willing to exercise its military force in Syria, but not in Israel. And I believe that geopolitically, the United States basically holds, nation states generally act in their own self-interest, but the United States in particular basically holds another form of blackmail against other powers. If China were to suddenly decide to try to do justice in the Middle East, I suspect there would be a war in Taiwan. I suspect that the U.S. would pull whatever levers it could to ensure that any state that attempted to get in the way of its and Israel's domination would suffer consequences. So I think our hurdles are tremendous, but I think a lot of what we're talking about and doing is the right thing to do.
Well, thanks for the Sam. Let's just bring Patrick back into the discussion. Patrick, one can call it blackmail in more ways than one, whether we're talking about Israel, Netanyahu, nuclear blackmail, economic blackmail on the part of the United States of America, Donald Trump, obviously threatening sanctions, threatening a whole host of issues, tariffs, and the like as well. And I think in South Africa, we've seen that firsthand, even with our president, who had visited the White House as well, and how that had actually played out at the end of the day. The key issue here is the lines have been drawn. There is a clear divide. And just looking at the Hague group in Colombia at this point in time, in terms of a resolution that may be drawn, proposed actions, and everything else that may go along or that may emanate from the summit. But again, it is about the global south and the global north. And we see even in Europe, a lot more draconian. We've seen it in the United Kingdom as well, with Palestine Action legislation labeling the Palestine Action Group as a terrorist organization. Now you've got Europe and Western Europe in particular towing the line with Israel and with what the United States is doing. And on the other hand, you've got the global south. Now the key issue in terms of outcomes and expectations coming out of the summit, I mean, is this likely to make an impact on the global north?
That's such a great question, because we can even think back 40 years to what happened here in Johannesburg that shook things up because it involved the global north beginning to de-link from apartheid. And that was only because of activists, both here in the rumble of the protests, but also because of, certainly where I learned my politics, people like Dennis Brutus in the US, and lots of protests that broke the banks and their ties. Before I mention that in more detail, because I think it's such a great inspiration to us, just recall that the global north and the global south get confused when you have a BRICS layer: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and China is in the meeting in Colombia. And yet they're the $20 billion a year trade. That drone that honed in on Yahya Sinwar, that was a Chinese drone from DJI. In fact, there are thousands of them there. And the Chinese have privatized the Haifa port alongside India. It was the Shanghai Port Corporation, a state-owned company, but also the Adani company from India. Now, of course, Russia has about 2 million, according to Vladimir Putin, 2 million Russian citizens who are in Israel, of the 7.2 million Jewish Israelis. And they are in the IDF. So are in the IDF the likes of Ethiopians. Ethiopian Jews are in the thousands. Indians are in their hundreds. South Africans, probably in the dozens. So we have 4 of the BRICS countries who are actually engaged in prosecuting the genocide, and then many military links. India, the most obvious, aside from those drones from China. So China being in the house in Colombia is terribly important, if indeed there's going to be follow-through. What kind of follow-through would hit hard? It would be, maybe I have to retreat from discussions about the armed struggle because I'm not equipped, but I do know that the economic bite that was accomplished in this country drove a wedge between the white bourgeoisie, especially English-speaking capital here in Johannesburg, and the white racists in Pretoria. And that wedge was financial sanctions. And it was 40 years ago, as protests occurred, as a state of emergency was declared again. You'll remember this, perhaps. I was young and very active in the US side. And what it struck me as is when P.W. Botha gave his Rubicon speech in August 1985, and he shook his finger and said, "Do not push us too far." And then the wave hit, the wave of banks withdrawing protests outside the banks, the default on the foreign debt, imposition of exchange controls, and then they closed the stock market. It was a panic here amongst our white English-speaking bourgeoisie, to the extent that the Anglo-American corporation, the biggest, sent its CEO, Gavin Relly, sent Zach de Beer from what's now the Democratic Alliance to go to Zambia to strike the kind of beginning of a deal with Oliver Tambo and Chris Hani and Thabo Mbeki, and Joe Slovo was there. I mean, it was an extraordinary moment. It's captured in a film, I might just add. Your viewers can see it on YouTube, at least the trailer. It's called "Have You Heard from Johannesburg? The Bottom Line." Actually, I showed that at Islamic University in Gaza, showed it at the Friends Meeting House in Ramallah with the Boycott National Committee. Standing ovations, not for me, but for this exemplary hit of a nonviolent character on the Achilles heel to squeeze capital and pull it away from the state. And that's what I think today we are in a situation where we can envisage, having seen blackouts in Israel, for 2 reasons. One is that the bombs from Iran hit some of the power plants, as I mentioned. But the other reason is that they're getting very hot there in the summers, like to 40, 45 degrees. And that's because of the climate crisis. And that's where we bring the other big movement, which is stop coal, not just coal to Israel, but coal in general. use a just energy transition partnership, which is funded to some extent by the European imperialists, but to use that to compensate any workers here in Mpumalanga, in the Glencore mines and the African Rainbow mineral mines, and compensate them for their struggle against export of coal to Israel. Those are the sort of connections to bring the two great movements, the climate movement and the Palestine solidarity. And of course, Sam will remind me, there's another great movement, No Kings, a movement against Donald Trump, a movement that also takes on Elon Musk and devastates his wealth. A quarter of his $400 billion has evaporated. The Tesla showrooms are being destroyed and people are boycotting Teslas. Those are the sorts of spirits of resistance, not just day to day, but that really have a big impact on the broader political economy and can drive the wedges in that can weaken the enemy. That's what I would posit as one of our ways forward. And I don't think that, as much as I admire the Hague group, I don't think they're quite ready, because the power relations in a place like South Africa, as well as some of the other countries, and I regret the big one, China, won't let us yet until we get the activists more hard-hitting. So we will have a UAE protest, for example, in Johannesburg and Pretoria next month. UAE, one of the BRICS countries, and of course, one of the major supporters of Israel in the Gulf. And even though it's in the BRICS, they may have some rhetoric about Palestine and two states, but we know what they're really doing. That's where I think we also had one against Egypt, a protest a couple of months ago in Pretoria. I think that's the direction our movements must go in.
Well, certainly those directions are taking place, and I think with the UAE one as well, of all the Arab nations, I think one that has been most complicit in this genocide has been the United Arab Emirates. But Shabnam, just coming back again, and Patrick has said just so much as far as governments are concerned, and singling out a number of governments that still continue maintaining their relationship, economic or otherwise, with Israel. And you and I have had this discussion, and I know through your forums as well, through your networks, through many a conference that you've attended, this has been quite a sticky point as well. But again, where does this leave people like us, the activists on the ground as well, and more importantly, in terms of putting pressure on these very governments who on the one hand talk about peace, talk about ending the genocide, yet they continue in their relationship in more ways than one with this Zionist apartheid entity?
It's such a complex hydra, Spider's web doesn't even begin to cover it. When Patrick talks about the economics that are involved in all of these corporations that are benefiting from genocide, but we know we've got them rattled, because that very report caused them to inflict sanctions upon Francesca Albanese as one person. And the same could happen to any number of us. But that very reaction said to us that we had hit a nerve by calling out the corporations. And the response was so interesting because it hinged on a threat to sovereignty and a threat to economics. So I certainly most wholeheartedly agree that the economic strategy is central to everything that we're doing. I want to pause to just highlight some of the measures that were decided in this emergency conference. And that includes the main measures, in any case, decided or proposed. Enforcement of international arrest warrants. One wonders whether that will actually happen. The severance of diplomatic relations. Again, as a South African, I have to wonder whether that will actually happen. A ban on arms supplies. And we've heard countries, talk the talk, but not walk the walk on the subject. And this is why when we have dock workers who are actively preventing those shipments from happening, that is a very, very powerful action that we can take. And certainly the role of workplace solidarity and the workers' movement continues to become critical for humanity at large. Then, of course, sanctions and asset freezes to increase the economic and political pressure to halt its campaign. I must on that point note that the Israeli Stock Exchange has expanded by 179% in the last 2 years. Even though we know ports have closed, the average Israeli maybe is affected economically, but the big wigs at the top operating inside that stock exchange have seen benefits to the tune of 179%. It's grotesque, really. And of course, they talk about in the declaration or the outcomes, adherence to international law obligations, including the Genocide Convention, and specifically ongoing legal proceedings, further investigations, prosecutions of individuals, Support for humanitarian aid and Palestinian rights. This is a tough one because, I mean, we've noted many times the aid is rotting while children are dying without baby formula, live on our televisions or on our phones. There were some other notable statements around suspending relations with Is Not Real, demonstrating tangible government actions, not just rhetoric, and of course highlighting participating nations. But it comes down to enforcement. It always comes down to enforcement as to whether these declarations in practical effect are going to happen, which brings me back to the first point earlier. Why does it take so long? What is it going to take for the global south to realize that the oligarchy, largely operating in the global north, but of course having their accomplices everywhere, is not going to stop at Palestine? They've become so emboldened that they comfortably say they actually don't care about law, international law, human rights, rule of law, any of that. And still, we are so slow off the mark that one of our other countries to become a target of imperialism tomorrow, next week, or next month. There's nothing preventing us from becoming the next Palestine. And this is why, yes, multilateralism is important, but we also need a collaborative military force that's available to defend people in the global south and oppressed peoples around the world. I just want to highlight, and you probably need to go to break. I think I saw Sadiq say that earlier, is that Is Not Real stole missile tank technology from South Africa in 2010. There was no investigation, there was no accountability, which again, raises into glaring focus the hypocrisies around various statements and positions that we take, where we were unable to, leave alone the missile technology, prosecute IOF recruits from our own country who were going to kill babies in Palestine. And let me lastly say, because I'm not sure how much time we have, on the subject of one state or two states, I'm very clear that there is only one state, and that is Palestine. And those Israelis who have realized that what Is Not Real has done to the Palestinians over all these years and are prepared to show remorse and take practical steps, the Palestinians will have to decide whether they can find a way to live together. But there's no such thing as a two-state solution. If we allow that to happen, we are saying to Is Not Real and to other neo-colonizers and imperialists that you will be rewarded with a state were you to steal the land of people in any part of the world. And we know that Is Not Real is already operating in Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the blood diamonds, the chaos we're seeing there. Israel is at the center of that. Lesotho spat with South Africa over territorial borders being funded by Israel. The chaos that we're seeing or we're going to see in the Sahel region, which is, trying to uplift themselves, is not real again. And so, and of course, we know there are moves to displace or ethnically cleanse Gazans into Somaliland or Libya. So the solidarity that we need amongst nations in the global south and our allies is incredibly important. But to get what we've never got, we have to do what we've never done. I'll leave it there for now.
Yes, Shabnam, in fact, and I know that solidarity, you've been working very hard behind the scenes as well in terms of that solidarity that we must have. But also, I think, Uthman, just coming back, and Shabnam spoke about enforcement, and in the absence of enforcement, what other options are there? Because Shabnam knows it as well here in South Africa, and Patrick is also aware of this, where we've got a number of South Africans serving in the IDF. And we've been trying to get them prosecuted for the last 13 years or so. And yet again, we're talking about a lack of enforcement where many of these dockets have actually been gathering dust for well over 13 years. But again, looking at options, and I know, you spoke about the military options as well. What else is available? What else can be done?
I'm going to try to answer this in a spiritual / Islamic way, which is my primary way of understanding the world and politics. The root of it is a personal emancipation from fear, and at the highest level from fear of death. This goes back, the reason we don't have enforcement is because we are fearful of the consequences of enforcement. We do not have the courage to take on the oppressor, because at some point an instinct will kick in Similar to what, Sam, you were alluding to with this fear of nuclear weapons. At some point, the oppressor will threaten your life. And at some point, the oppressor will threaten destruction, further destruction. And therefore, you have a choice. You have a choice of living in subordination and accepting that idea of reality, that the oppressor will annihilate us even further. And therefore, it's sensible to just do things on the side and do what we can on the side and be realistic on the side. Or you actually have what comes down to a leap of faith, which is, I prefer liberty to life. That's why people, the expression liberty or death, you have to want it more than your own life. And once you have that, it is emancipation. You say, I have no fear of Israel. It doesn't matter if they kill me. I am doing this because I know it's true. Now, that has to be the root of our individual liberation, but our collective liberation. We have to say, even no matter what comes, we are going to take them on. And look, if we don't do that, yes, Israel has nuclear weapons, and they will keep on using whatever tactics and avenues, nefarious methods they have to keep us subordinated. We will continue to live like that, and that attitude will spread everywhere. Imagine every time there's another genocide, everyone will think, what can we do about it? We tried our best with Gaza, right? That failed. If we lose, it's a psychological defeat for all of humanity. We will never, I think, be able to confidently say we can beat the oppressor. And I think that will only have that liberation, as Shabnam said, if there is a one state where there is Palestine and the Palestinians are given the right of return and there is justice brought for all of the perpetrators. Imagine that feeling. Imagine imagine that wall, the apartheid wall smashing. Imagine that day. Dream of that day, right? That will only happen if there is a military intervention. There is no other way. Everything else is nonsense. I've tried it all. We've tried it all. It's not worked. And Shabnam, you said, if you want something new, we try something new. This is the only thing that could work. Iran did some damage. They were bleeding $800 million a day, Israel. They did some damage. That was one country on its own, actually. Imagine Turkey, imagine Jordan. I know it sounds ridiculous. Imagine sounds like a dream, but at least we should dream of it, right? At least we should ask for it. Because what's the point of anything else? So it is liberty or death, and I do have that mindset personally now. I don't want to live in this shitty system. Sorry for my language. I shouldn't. I would rather have my chance at success, and if I lose, at least I lived trying it, right? So yeah, military intervention, and sign me up when it happens.
Thanks for that, Osman. Yes, I think we've got about 5 or 6 minutes before we end this evening's broadcast, because we still want to take the summit live, the rest of the summit live right here on Salam Media. So Sam, starting with you, just to get some closing thoughts.
I'm very glad that you mentioned Palestine Action. I think that their direct action in England and the legal measures put up against them, Albanese's most recent report talks about Elbit systems, for example, but makes no mention of Palestine Action, the group taking them on most directly. So I think that there are opportunities, even short of direct military confrontation, that, straddle the fence, that use economic strategy and violence against machinery, against the machinery of death. So I take some inspiration from that. And, we all martyr ourselves in different ways, devoting ourselves to a cause, for example, short of actual death. I I do think that it's strategic to not live in fear, but to use every tool available to us at all times.
Thank you for that, Sam. Patrick?
A very quick word on how we use the tools here in South Africa that we have immediately at hand. We've got a wonderful BDS campaign and a Palestine solidarity campaign. We've really got people that can go out in their hundreds. We want to make it the thousands. The next date, I mentioned the UAE, 26th, but the next date in each of our cities, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, in just 20 seconds. Why do we want to get Parks Tau, the minister, to now confront what he had answered in Parliament to a question, I think it was from the Al Jamaa party, and it was a question, why not cut the ties, the coal ties to Israel? And his answer was, because we respect the non-discriminatory clauses in the World Trade Organization. Now, that was last September. Trump came in. There is no WTO. It's been smashed. And so we really have to go to the DTIC, to the offices in Durban, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Pretoria, and really say to them, there's no excuse whatsoever for fueling genocide, and we can regulate the export of a dangerous material, coal, under all the regulations and legislation we have, and it's way overdue for us to do that. And by the way, Parks Tau and Cyril Ramaphosa asking for a game of golf with Donald Trump, that's not working. You can't appease and be so obsequious to the oppressive forces we've now got to fight. August 21, we'll see you on the streets.
Absolutely, Patrick. Shabnam?
Yeah, we'll see you on the streets, Patrick. I'm hoping that I could be there. I just want to highlight the Western Cape, which is also under threat from Zionist ambition seeking to separate it from the rest of our country. And of course, we know on the shore, natural gases, oils, resources, same game, same country, same place around the world. And so we have a personal interest as South Africans, not only because of our struggle against apartheid or our internationalism, international solidarity, but because our country is also under threat from Zio imperialism, and we have to expose that. And so this is part of why we are hosting, through one of our partners, the International Legal Coalition for Palestine, the Africa chapter, and our allies, a Truth and Restoration Commission on Palestine, which includes a commission of inquiry examining the IOF non-prosecution failures, the restrictions of the right to free speech and protest in our own country, and the accomplices, the war technology, and the impact on indigenous peoples if the Western Cape was stolen from the rest of the country. So I would ask people to become actively engaged in whatever way possible, because the power of the people is greater than people in power.
Thank you for the Shabnam. In fact, you've just reminded me, Shabnam, old habits die, and I refer to them as the IDF. And I know I need to start changing my thinking as well at my age, obviously looking and talking about the IOF right now. So that's something I'm going to take away from this discussion. Osman Noor, I will obviously allow you to have the final word.
Well, a real pleasure to have this discussion. Thank you so much. We have started a campaign for a military intervention, which I'm coordinating. It's Protect Palestine. So we need to push that into the mainstream. At least it should be spoken about more. I'm glad it has been spoken about here. But we need to bring this into a reality. That starts with discussing it and campaigning for it. So please check us out. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you, and especially to you, Shabnam. I know you played a large role in putting this panel together as well, together with Patrick, with Sam, and with Osman Noor as well. We do appreciate all of you taking time out with us right here on Salam Media. All the best to you.
Thank you, Inayet, and thank you, Salam Media.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayet Wadee, and we're actually still going to be staying with what is taking place in Colombia, the summit that is taking place. So immediately after this break, we are going to be taking a live coverage of the summit, and also taking a look specifically in terms of what the outcomes are, and more importantly, looking at the resolutions that will be coming out of the summit. So with that, I'm going to be leaving you for now, but stay with Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, bakkies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Kids these days are smart, and when you're competing for their attention against their smartphones, you need to make smart choices, like using Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil in every meal you make. It's naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether you're cooking, frying, or baking, you get the great tasting results that'll get their attention faster than the latest app. And if that doesn't work, change the Wi-Fi password. Sunfoil. Now we're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come
There
together,
will be no
it could only
wars.
mean Al Bayt Lodge,
We think on the
your true
stars
home
ad
away from
astra,
home.
as the
Al
Romans
Bayt is
said.
the ideal heaven for
We
families,
said ad
business people,
astra
and
too.
tourists with its
And
4-star family
humanity
rooms
moves
and
around
other
the universe,
luxurious
bringing
facilities.
life.
Conveniently situated
And the
close to Port
inert
Elizabeth Airport,
world is
the
going
beach,
to
and other
become something
amenities.
vital.
Your stay will be
Thinking
truly
with
unforgettable
a free
as you'll be
brain,
taking home
helping
lasting
each
memories
other.
of the warm hospitality,
And it
the
will be our
serenity and
destiny
tranquility that
if
Al
we
Bayt has
defeat
to offer.
today's
For
barbaric,
reservations, call 041
heinous,
583 6415
situation. And
or
this is
visit
done only if Palestine is brave.
www.albaytlodge.co.za.
We met
For
with
too
the
many
Palestinian
communities across
guerrilla
Africa and the
from
world,
the Palestinian
access to
Liberation
clean water
Front.
remains a dream.
The
At Africa
movement,
Muslims
April
Agency,
19th,
we dig
the
deep,
Bolivarian
reaching
movement,
into the heart of the
and we
earth to
trained
fill the
together,
cups of
and we
those in
learned
need.
things together.
Sponsor a water well
And it
for
was in the desert of
16,500 rand,
Batraba
or a
in
borehole
Libya,
in
where
Afghanistan
Gaddafi
for
was
55,000
alive.
rand, or Africa for 65,000
And
rand, or
Swapo
any amount. With water comes food,
from Namibia,
health,
who is here,
education,
was
and
there.
growth. An ongoing
And they
reward
were
with
part
Africa
of the
Muslims
National
Agency.
African Council.
Yasin
And
Badat
they were
Financial
from the
Advisory.
Polisario
Are your
front
financial
that
goals feeling
spoke
out of
Spanish,
reach?
Arab,
Yasin Badat Financial
because it's
Advisory
another
is
people
here
that
to
were
turn your
conquered, and
aspirations into
Greeks.
achievements. Our dedicated team,
So a
armed with a history
series of
success,
guys,
is ready to
because
guide you
none of
through the
them were
complex nature of
old,
financial and
they
investment
gathered
planning.
together from Latin
Whether you're a
American,
seasoned investor
Panamanian,
or new to the game, our
and from
personalized
Africa,
solutions cater to your
and the
unique
Middle East,
goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to
to train us
transparency,
for a war.
integrity, and excellence.
Finally,
Ready to
we
unlock a
ended up
world of
making
financial
peace,
freedom? Partner with
dialectically
us
speaking.
today. Call Yasin Badat
Mandela,
Financial Advisory
Arafat,
at +27
M19 in Colombia,
346
and almost
2071
all the
or
Latin
visit
American guerrillas. We gathered together
www.yasinbadat.com.
to prepare for a
Yasin
war,
Badat Financial
and we ended
Advisory,
up creating
guiding
peace
you
for
to
the world.
financial success.
And that's where
Make a
Palestine were
conscious
with
choice.
us.
Sip for change and support Palestine Drinks
Nobody
Africa.
has wrote
With every can,
that
you
book. I
help
have
end the
asked people
genocide
from
and
the
stand in
M19, the still
solidarity
surviving
with
ones,
Palestine.
to write it because part of this history,
Choose between our
because
original or
tells
sugar-free
different
options
things
available in the case of 24.
that
Every sip is a step
progressive men
towards
and women
justice.
are
Every
universal.
purchase a powerful message of
It's not
unity and
something
support for the
from a
Palestinian
small
cause.
place. They got
Contact
together with the world. They crossed the
082-888-1440
ideas of fight against tyranny.
or
Two of my friends died there.
082-7739-556 today and be part of the change. Palestine Drinks Africa. Sip for change. Liberty for everyone.
Director
Listen
of
to
the Administrative
something
Department
fresh.
of the Presidency of the Republic. And to all the
Listen to
participants here on the different delegations of the 30 countries that are participating in this first emergency conference on Palestine, please receive our warm regards. It is important to talk about the context. 8 countries: Bolivia, Cuba, Colombia, Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, Senegal, and South Africa gathered in the city of The Hague as a response to the dreadful situation in Palestine, with the purpose of vouching to continue to withstand the measures of the International Justice Court and the International Criminal Court, and to stop the genocide in Palestine that has over 58,000 people being killed, especially children and teenagers, and the destruction of the country. The Hague Group aims to comply with the arrest orders issued by the International Criminal Court against the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, for war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated during the fight between Israel and Hamas that has started on October 27, 2023. We also established the mechanisms to prevent the supply of weapons to Israel and hinder ships via link to the Israel war industry to dock in their ports. In this closing ceremony of the first conference, we want to give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Multilateral Affairs of Colombia, Mr. Mauricio Jaramillo Hazer, who is going to read the statement of the first Emergency Ministerial Conference on Palestine in Bogota.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I continue reading the declaration.
Conclusion of the Emergency Conference on Palestine. We, the representatives of Bolivia, Cuba, Colombia, Indonesia, Iraq, Libya, Malaysia, Namibia, Nicaragua, Oman, San Vincent and the Grenadines, South Africa, and all other states that endorse the following before the 20th September 2025, guided by the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and international law, including the inalienable right of self-determination of peoples and the principle of the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force, meeting urgently in Bogota, Colombia from 15th to 16th July 2025 with the aim in strengthening our collective resolve by creating an unified international voice and implement our international obligations in regard to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, grieving each life taken in the course of Israel's genocidal actions in the occupied Palestinian territory, deploring the obstruction of humanitarian aid and the deliberate indiscriminate violence and collective punishment deployed against the starving people of the Gaza Strip, lamenting the repeated mass force displacement of the Palestinian civilian population and the obstruction of their return, recognizing the risk that Israel's action pose to the prospects for regional peace and security, as well as the integrity of international law at large, refusing to remain passive observers to the devastation in the occupied Palestinian territory and the denial of the Palestinian people's unalienable right to self-determination, reaffirming the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 19 July 2024 on the consequences arising from Israel's illegal policies and practices, which are, by their nature, the concern of all states, recalling all relevant UN resolutions, including United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1024, and the obligations that member states assume to take actions in line with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion in July 2024, international human rights law and humanitarian law, stressing the importance of institutions such as the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court to fulfill its mandates without fear or favor is essential to the preservation of the international rule of law. Condemning the unilateral attacks and threats against United Nations mandate holders, as well as key institutions of the human rights architecture and international justice, building on the legacy of global solidarity movements that have dismantled apartheid and other oppressive systems, setting a model for future coordinated responses to international law violations, recognizing the complementarity of the Hague Group to other initiatives such as the Madrid Group, recognizing, is it okay right now? I think it's a problem of the microphone. Okay, right. Okay. Recognizing the complementarity of the Hague Group to other initiatives such as the Madrid Group aimed at strengthening the implementation of international law, welcoming the high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution and the UN General Assembly from 28th and 30 July 2025, stressing the urgency of all members to fulfill in good faith the obligation assumed in accordance with the UN Charter and international law, united in our conviction that coordinated action at national and international levels is an urgent imperative to protect the Charter of the United Nations, to uphold obligation under international law, and to promote just and lasting peace action, a lasting peace across the world, as well as ending the illegal occupied of Palestine and enabling the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self-determination. Reiterating our commitment to implement the relevant provisional measures, judgments, and advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice, as well as relevant UN resolutions, including General Assembly Resolution A 1024, we hereby announce the following measures to be adopted based on states' domestic legal and legislative frameworks. Number one, prevent the provision or transfer of arms, munitions, military fuel, related military equipment, and dual-use items to Israel as appropriate, to ensure that our industry does not contribute the tools to enable or facilitate genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other violations of international law. Prevent the transit, docking, and servicing of vessels at any port, if applicable, within our territorial jurisdiction, while being fully compliant with applicable international law, including UN clause, in all cases where there is a clear risk of the vessel being used to carry arms, munitions, military fuel, related military equipment, and dual-use items to Israel, to ensure that our territorial waters and ports do not serve as conduits for activities that enable genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other violations of international law. Number three, prevent the carriage of arms, munitions, military fuel, related military equipment, and dual-use items to Israel on vessels bearing our flag, while being fully compliant with applicable international law, including UN clause, ensuring full accountability, including deflagging for non-compliance with this prohibition, not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. Number four, commence an urgent review of all public contracts in order to prevent public institutions and public funds, where applicable, from supporting Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian territory, which may entrench its unlawful presence in the territory, to ensure that our nationals and companies and entities under our jurisdiction, as well as our authorities, do not act in any way that would entail recognition or provide aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. Number five, comply with our obligations to ensure accountability for the most serious crimes under international law through robust, impartial, and independent investigations and prosecutions at national or international levels, in compliance to ensure justice for all victims and the prevention of future crimes. Support universal jurisdiction mandates as and where applicable in our legal constitutional frameworks and judiciaries, to ensure justice for all victims and the prevention of future crimes in the occupied Palestinian territory. We emphasize that these measures constitute a collective commitment to defend the foundational principles of international law. In recognition of all the violations of the right to health, we call upon the UN Economic and Social Council to commission an immediate investigation of the health and nutritional needs of the population of Gaza, devise a plan to meet those needs on continuing and sustain the basis and report of these matters before the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. We appeal to all the United Nations member states to enforce our obligations while promoting mechanisms for cooperation between all parties. Adopted in Bogotá, Colombia, this 6th July of 2025. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, viceministro de Asuntos.
Thank you so much, Minister of Multilateral Affairs, Mr. Harami Fazir. Now we continue with the words of the General Secretary of the Department of Foreign Relationships and Cooperation of South Africa, Mr. Sentanga.
President Petro, Excellencies, I want to start by thanking the government of Colombia once again for hosting this meeting. I also extend my gratitude to all those, both governments and civil society, who have joined us here for the last 2 days. At a time when foreign policy actions geared towards what some of us call maintaining the status quo is no longer useful, an approach that centers the dignity and equality of all people is welcomed. That is what we started doing over the last 2 days. Jonathan Shell, in his book entitled The Unconquerable World, writes about two competing impulses in humanity: the impulse for war and plunder, and the imposing impulse for peace and serenity. Sadly, as we are witnessing in Palestine, the Augustan tradition that sanctions and glorifies violence, plunder, and exploitation dominates and has subdued the tradition that is centered on justice, equality, and peace. It is our hope that the Hague Group takes up this challenge and actively mobilizes bias around a tradition of peace and justice. As discussed yesterday, the actions of the Israeli government is in breach of accepted international norms and laws, but in our statements we also said they are plainly immoral. Yesterday, the statements from almost all of the delegates dwelled on this issue of impunity. In fact, we called it institutional impunity. We may not have explicitly asked why we have this impunity, but the statements made by all the delegations did allude to what sustains it. On the same issue of Israeli impunity, one of the lawyers acting on behalf of the South African government at the ICJ, in the case South Africa versus Israel, made the following statement in the court. He said, "We have heard expressions of outrage that anyone could accuse Israel of acting in this way being in the immoral way I just discussed. We have heard sober assurances that Israel was doing and would do everything in its power to avoid civilian deaths as it exercised its claimed right of self-defense. We have heard boasts that Israel's army is the most moral army in history. We have heard flat denials that there is famine in Gaza. For months, people, particularly in the West, have appeared unwilling to actions are true." He then ended that statement by asking the following question: how could people who look like us and sound like us possibly engage in anything like genocide? The answer was offered to the court through another member of our team, who said the following. The question referring to the one posed by his colleague, he answered the following: this stems from a form of amnesia and denial by former colonial powers in relation to the crimes associated with colonial violence, but perpetrated against indigenous people. This includes the denial of genocide. This denial is clearly at play in Palestine. The denial of atrocities by Israel and the tacit condemnation of the horrific killings of Palestinians have led to the questioning, and this questioning was done in the room, almost indirectly. Does the West believe that Palestinian lives matter less than, say, Israeli lives or American or European lives? By extension, it begs the question whether the ideologies of superiority that justified colonial conquests, occupations, and genocides in Africa and other parts of the world still determine which people are deserving of protection by international human rights law and the international legal framework. This is not an outlandish assertion. Recently, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court stated that in his engagement with US senators and congresspeople, he was told that the ICC was not meant to hold the leaders of Israel accountable, as that court was designed for Africans and others. This institutionalized impunity for the powerful is steeped in the history of colonialism. The statements made yesterday suggested that we do have some consensus that the different global world needs building. That is a world where the use of force is replaced through dialogue and negotiations, where justice for all replaces impunity. I am hopeful that the work of the Hague Group, working in concert with other states, such as those active in the Madrid Group, and also with civil society activists, will lay the foundations of this just world. The joint statement that was just read out reflects this vision and intent. It was crafted by all of those who participated. It was signed thus far by 12 states, but indications are that over the next few days, many more will join. Again, I thank the government of Colombia, and I thank you all.
Muchas gracias, Secretario General.
Thank you so much, General Secretariat, Mr. Jindanga. Now we're going to listen the words of Mr. Riyad Mansour, Minister of Palestine.
Thank you very much. I am so honored to be here again for the second day in Bogota, Colombia, in the presence of His Excellency, the President and the Foreign Minister, in which I bring you greetings from the Palestinian people, our people who are steadfasting in every corner of the Palestine, including those from Gaza and from the Palestinian leadership. Yesterday, we had a very intense, serious, and very productive discussion, which was culminated in the adoption of this declaration. From Bogota, declared that we are beginning the process of action-oriented steps by those courageous ones at the beginning who have determined that they will open the door for practical steps in order to force Israel to comply with international law and with the will of the international community as we see it reflected in many resolutions in the Security Council, in the General Assembly, in the Human Rights Councils, and in other components of the United Nations. If what we did here yesterday and today is a turning point in the direction of not to tolerate the continuation of impunity and Israel to be above the law. We are beginning the process in which will be a massive wave of countries, of civil society organizations, of companies, of individuals, of all who cherish international law and justice to start taking practical steps in order to force Israel to stop the genocide against our people, especially in the Gaza Strip, and to comply with the historic advisory opinion of the ICJ, which declared, among other things, that this prolonged occupation is illegal and it has to be terminated as soon as possible. And the General Assembly legislated that this illegal occupation has to end in 1 year, and it called for a convening of an international conference concentrating on action. And I want to express our appreciation and admiration to His Excellency the President when he wrote that fabulous article in The Guardians emphasizing that the essence of this conference, to be followed by other conferences, is action-oriented. You cannot tell me you vote for me in the General Assembly, which I appreciate that for Palestine, or in the Security Council, but you cannot take action in your national capacity. Take action in your national capacity and under your own obligation in connection to your commitment to international law and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the UN. This is the time that each and every one of us, each country in their own sovereign, taken steps not to arm Israel, not to allow ships to stop in their ports carrying weapons to Israel to kill Palestinian children. We appreciate all of you present here, including civil society and massive media who are with us to unleash from Bogota this initiative. And I sincerely hope that it will affect in a massive way our deliberation in the General Assembly in New York starting on the 28th. This time is the time of action. This time is the time of freedom for the Palestinian people. This time is upholding international law. This time is victory for the Palestinian people, and I thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor Ministro de Estado.
Thank you so much, Mr. Riyad Mansour. Next, we have the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the situation of human rights in the Gazan territory, Palestinian territory, Mrs. Francesca Albanese.
This is because you told me not to put the bag on the floor. Señor Presidente Pedro, colleagues, what a momentous 2 days we have had. My heartfelt gratitude goes to Colombia and South Africa for bringing us together, and to the Colombian authorities and people for the incredibly warm welcome. There could not have been a better place for this gathering. I also thank the members of the Hague Group, all the courage and commitment, as well as the Secretariat and all participants, from state representatives to civil society, particularly those from Palestine. You should all be proud of the steps you have taken. What began as 9 countries in the Hague Group has gathered here 30 states fundamentally aligned with the need to end impunity of Israel. And this is an unprecedented shift for Palestine, as Ambassador Mansour also said. The six concrete measures agreed by 12 of you reflect the political courage I urged yesterday. These are not just measures. These are lifelines for a people under relentless assault and a world that has been paralyzed for too long. And let me pause. It is not that I think that the final text is perfect and beyond critique. I do, for example, the critical and the contextualized reference to the two-state solution at a time when 32 years of two-state solution discourse has led to the genocide we witness unfolding. Because Palestinian self-determination, reparations and return are not up for negotiation, as the International Court of Justice has declared, and this should be the premise of any political discussion. Nevertheless, the measures that have been agreed are to be absolutely welcomed, and now all states must implement them. Commitments to arms embargoes must turn into urgent policies and then domestic legislations enforceable by your judiciaries against all those who work to circumvent these commitments. Second, no safe harbors and arms shipment commitments must turn into regulatory enforcement through proper due diligence by state authorities on all those who travel through an jurisdiction. Third, that special rapporteurs have been calling for since the 2024 ICJ advisory opinion are a significant commitment and must lead to the review of your free trade agreements as a whole, and transparent and concrete action that actually severs the two-way trade and economic ties that are entrenching Israel's presence and enabling its genocide through normalization, material support, and profiteering. Fourth and last point, the commitments to international and domestic prosecutions must also become domestically enforceable mechanisms with built-in review process and concrete. Excellencies, I know that many in this room and beyond in public and private institutions are hesitant to stand up to one of the fiercest powers of our time. But as someone who comes from a place plagued by the mafia, where the logic of intimidation has mirrored, tormented, and killed those who stood for justice, I can tell you that logic cannot withstand and can be defeated by the unity of the people and the unity of struggles. By doing the right thing, you will find solidarity, and through solidarity, strength. Look at me. From the unique place of both vulnerability and strength I occupy today, I tell you, it's not the blow that knocks you down. It's the refusal to stand up to it. Excellencies, the genocide in Gaza is a defining moment for our global society. Quote, people take for granted what a child makes of things. The words said to me this morning by my sister in arms, Tlaleng Mofokeng, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health. In her words, quote, what is happening in Palestine and what is happening around it is shaping who we are, just as apartheid and the anti-apartheid movement shaped who I am, as I fought against it when I was 8 years old, and I saw others fighting for me. End of quote. What I want to say to you today, dear ministers, ambassadors, colleagues, and friends, and president, is all contained in the truth. The truth is that Palestine has already triggered a revolution, and you are part of it. Palestine is reshaping the global clear line between those who stand against genocide and those who inflict, defend, and profit from it. Millions are part of this growing movement. Some others just with rage or despair, not yet active, not yet mobilized, but it's just a matter of time. They are searching for principled leadership, leaders who value human dignity over strategic alliances, community over conquest, and who bring humanity back into international law. And if states remain merciless, the people will take these struggles into their own hands, and we cannot come to that. What we need now is a new multilateralism, as I said yesterday, non-hierarchical, rooted in shared humanity, and capable of reflecting a moral courage of nations across the globe. After all, even the United Nations is United Nations, not United States, and the United Nations Charter speaks of we. A group, perhaps without fully realizing it, starts to embody that leadership and that multilateralism today, where profits can still be pursued, but not at the expense of human life, where multinationals and their grip on politics somewhere cannot result in strangling life elsewhere. You only have to look at here in Colombia to find this reality. Last year, Colombia issued a very powerful presidential decree to halt coal transfers to Israel. And it is Western corporations like Drummond and Glencore, long complicit in imperial and neocolonial violence, who defy it, funneling coal through intermediaries to fuel Israel's annexation and genocide. And this must stop. While it should have long been our shared goal, this multilateralism we all need is now finally taking shape. I hope to see it flourish into a new way of being, where Western values of reason and democracy, of what remains of it, meet Asia's traditions of unity and diversity, Africa's Ubuntu, the sense of human interconnectedness, I am because you are, and Latin America's magical realism, rooted in indigenous cosmologies, ways of knowing and ways of being. Western people have so much to learn from other people and nations, starting with healing as a necessary part of political processes. It might be only the beginning, but we must begin somewhere, and state-wise, the Hague Group is that somewhere. Many more states and bold actions follow, so that together we might stop the massacre of the Palestinian people, uphold the integrity and full application of international law, dismantle settler colonialism, its manifestation and underpinning ideologies once and for all, and in so doing, lay the foundation for a more just and global order. Borrowing the words of Indian writer Arundhati Roy, I tell you, another world is not only possible, she is on the way. And on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. I hope you can hear her too. Over.
Gracias a la relatora especial.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur for Rights in Palestine, Mrs. Francesca Albanese. The Executive Secretariat of the Hague Group, Mrs. Varsha Gandhi Kota Neludla, is having her presentation now.
My gratitude to the government of Colombia, to Senor President Petro, for organizing this historic conference. This is both a tragedy and an honor. It's a tragedy because it's already too late. This emergency conference has been convened after 67 days of its genocide, live streamed to our phones and televisions every single day. But in the words of Simón Bolívar, in whose salon we've met and deliberated concrete measures over the last 2 days, a people that loves freedom will always be free. And when tyranny becomes law, rebellion is a right. Cuando la tiranía se hace ley.
When the tyranny is law, rebellion is a right.
One thing that I've learned in the last 6 months of building this rather audacious, perhaps crazy project of the Hague Group is that the threat of punishment is used over and over, not just against the peoples of the world or social movements and unions, but against states, for states to retreat to a language of pleas, to retreat to a language of condemnations, of calls and of demands, rather than of action. If there's one thing that defines what is different about the Hague Group, is that we believe in protagonism, not supplication. At the beginning of yesterday's meeting, I said, there are often moments in history that mark a before and after in their wake, and I hope that this emergency conference is one of them. After the reading of today's joint statement, I believe that we know that it is. Today marks the end of an era of impunity and the beginning of collective state action. It was my honor in January to welcome 9 nations to the Hague Group. It is an even greater honor to welcome 30 states, governments of conscience, to Bogota today that have brought the spirit of the Hague Group into Salon Bolívar. And I'm sure that this honor is only going to continue over the coming weeks as both the Hague and the concrete measures that we seek to pursue only receive greater and greater support. I want to return back halls in the rooms of where it all began, which was the Peace Palace in The Hague at South Africa's historic genocide convention case against Israel, where one of the lawyers, and many of them would often say to each other, we know when we've been successful, in the words of Bobby Sands, our revenge will be the laughter of our children. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias a la Secretaria Ejecutiva.
Thank you, Special Secretariat, Mrs. Varsha Gandhi Kota. Ladies and gentlemen, in this moment now, the President of the Republic of Colombia, Mr. Gustavo Petro, is going to talk with you. Regards to the ambassadors, diplomatic body, chiefs of accredited missions in Colombia and in other countries, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Rosa Yolanda Villavicencio Mapi, who was also a migrant in Spain and who became a socialist leader in Madrid. General Secretary of the Department of International Affairs and Cooperation of South Africa, same number, Minister of State of Palestine, Mr. Riyad Mansour, Riyadh, sorry. Executive Secretary of the Hague Group, Barsha Andikota, Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the situation of human rights in the Palestine territories occupied from 1967. I should say from 1948. Mrs. Francesca Albanese, officers of the national government, media, national and international media in general, to all the people here in this room. We were born on April 19th. On April 19th, Colombian people cried for freedom. On April 19th, I believe, I hope I'm not wrong with my memory, Palestine rebellion. Precisely when the occupation started. On April 19th, we stood up in rebellion. And I think that there are other April 19th along the history. And these perhaps gather us together as people that in different parts of the world have risen up in rebellion because we want to be democrats and free. And in the world, there is more and more slavery. As time goes by, those that rose the flag of democracy has become slavists. New slaveries, as Pope Bergoglio, my friend, said. Francis, who was also a rebel. And it was because he felt what was happening spiritually in the whole of humanity. We're going to barbaric times, but we can also move to freedom. All the dialectical philosophers, Chinese Lao Tzu, I just heard the same philosophy on the Guambian people from Cauca when they named Barbara as a member of the Colombian Academy of the Language. That is not a small feat. And I read her text just presented, expressing in a flawless Spanish the philosophy of the Nisak people and the ancestral indigenous people as well. And this philosophy is just dialectical, built without knowing Hegel, without knowing Lao Tzu, without even knowing Heraclitus, even older. Philosophy that has been with me to make calls. Everything moves on the principle of contradiction. Therefore, a positive has its negative. Light, an area filled with light can become dark. Everything can turn into an opposite. Otherwise, the story wouldn't move. Nor the universe, because the principle is universal, it seems. In the universe that we see that comes from the past, everything, including the moon, because light travels in space, as Einstein said, we see light and darkness. And we are always in charge of seeing beyond that part of the darkness becomes light. We can detect it. It's a light that was launched many years ago, thousands of light years ago. But sometimes light disappears because worlds died as well. Enormous worlds. We know that, and we don't know if they come back to be light. Some physicals said that it is the case. But here we are in an infinitesimal point of the universe. And so it seems the only one with life, or at least smart life, or intelligent life. How many light years around us we can see? and there is no life. It seems so. And it seems that we cannot talk about only the idea of Diogenes, that everything else is belief. And the lantern of Diogenes doesn't show life in the universe. We are alone, unique. And it seems that in the universe there is an intelligence that is energy. Because even darkness has energy. Energy all from the space and others, but there is one special, the one that inhabits this planet on mammals or on a species, and among them human beings. The only ones with the immense responsibility in all the universe of the intelligence of thinking. We are thinking animals. And that thinking is developed more and more in its main essence, which is the brain. Every time that a baby is born, the jewel of the universe is born, their brain and their heart, in a package that we call human being. And if the human being and the human brain that was acting alone, in order to be able to survive in the planet with the cold that we have, there is an experience that was just experienced here in Bogota. To be able to live, they had to help each other. And helping each other is the secret that allows us to thrive and sometimes, for worse, dominate the planet, the only place where life thrives. It seems so. So helping each other, it's our secret. But this aid has two big ways. It's an aid that is born from the heart, from the feeling, to be more accurate, because we are sensitive and the mammals help each other as some other animals do. The ones that survive help each other. The bees that go in a hive, they feed by helping each other, sucking the honey and finding it. Sometimes they die for it. And this attraction of the honey, of the bee with the honey, we can call it survival instinct. But in mammals, it's called love. What we feel to help each other is love. And without this, we cannot live. The neoliberal in the last stage of the great capital are being destroyed, and the feeling of barbaric stages are just an expression of a capitalism that is capitalism only in paper. As we were talking when I had a feud with Macron, that the GDP measured in dollars and euros, GDP that not everything is production, has 110 trillion per year, and the public debt has 230 trillion per year. It's going to collapse. I don't know when, but it's going to collapse. It's collapsing already. Capitalism is not more than a world of paper, but it has the virtue, or the dark virtue, to take us to the barbaric times in its own collapse. Barbaric times that are really dreadful, but there are two. The one of the climate change and artificial intelligence, as Hopkins says. Not because having an AI that is not necessarily live, but what are we producing in the universe? But that must be under control of the live intelligence, and not from a country, not from a mega rich capitalist and crazy guy, but it has to be under the reins of humanity, live intelligence of humanity. Otherwise, humanity is going to end. Maybe the world can be very productive, but then again, we're going to unravel And Gaza is just an experiment of mega rich trying to prove to all the people of the world how do we respond to a rebellion of humanity. They want to bomb us all. The ones that are in the south, but we're going to end up, as in Guernica, bombing themselves with foreign weapons. And this perspective of slaughtering kills the multilateralism that we should find the cities, kills the idea of a global world, an international world. I have requested a meeting from SELAC with the government of the United States, and they haven't given not even a single answer, because they don't want to get in touch with Latin America and the Caribbean, because they know that working with each one separately, they are stronger. So they are not dialogue. They didn't talk. They threat, as it happens to us often. Some are scared of threats. Some have become so accustomed to these that we are not scared anymore. And the history has been like that in our people. Histories of rebellions and barbaric times. And the possibility of these is felt here, but also dialectically speaking, the possibility of having a different humanity. The link together, and we survived, because the other way of helping besides the heart is thinking. And Newton's parable and Robinson's Crusoe parable would be lie. Will be only illusions that we feel. We live amongst ghosts because capitalism is a ghost. And sometimes we believe the idea of this ghost. Just ideas. Newton couldn't create his gravity theory without algebra, without the Arabs, without the Romans, without the Greeks, without the Egyptians, without other people that in America, as we knew, had a more profound idea of mathematics. They were calculating the stars, the planets, more than even the same mathematicians. In Latin America, we have marvelous things that want to hinder the America, because the America was reduced to just a part of the American continent. In Americas, we had people for over 30,000 years, and they created art. In Brazil, 20,000 years until we have the data. And places close to Bogota, to the Amazon jungle, Chiribiquete, that I want to open to the world, and there is a fine documentary about that, something magical between the jungles and the color birds, enormous murals as we haven't seen maybe in any other part of artists. By generations, they take their brands and their ideas, their hands as people that were there forever in the humanity, in their history. 20,000 years our ancestors bear, and maybe even more. And yes, they, with some laugh and mocking from pseudo-economists of the cachacos, as we call the ones that are not from the Caribbean, but that is also here close to this place. 6,000 years ago, there was a people that we didn't know where they were coming from. The genes are not in the places where we have survived. And all of them died. They didn't have any descendants. Maybe the women died for a reason, maybe first, because in this land with so much water, that group disappeared. Maybe they didn't help each other, maybe their loneliness killed them. A lack of water. Bogota, not now, but some weeks ago, Bogota was without city with 9 million inhabitants, because they burned the Amazon, and it turns out that the water that arrived here was from the Amazon jungle, and it went to great lengths, and the vegetation also turned the steam into liquid water, and we ran out of it. Climate crisis, the second fact that can finish the humanity, and we all know.
A climate crisis that is rising. Let's look at the dialect speech behind this. We are in the region with most extensive oil exploitation in the region, and we have our national oil company Ecopet to perpetrate fracking, and I have called for intervention of said company to preserve the natural beauty of Colombia. Here we are a reservoir of animals. Many animals migrate here, and that was discovered when we lost Panama, and they built the Panama Canal. And my sincerest respect for Panama, but we used to be a united nation, as well as we were with Venezuela. And if we follow along the ancient borders of the Grand Colombia that almost reach Nicaragua, it almost covered most of the Caribbean. Most of current nations wanted to our yellow, blue, and red flag. And Haiti wanted to rebel. And with all due respect to my Haitian friends, the first free territory of Latin America was founded by Bencos Jongo, and there is not a single monument to him. There is a monument to Belarcázar Conquistador in Cali, but he was perpetrated genocide. So this is all about the dialectics on how the free people made statues and monuments for those esclavists, slaverists. We should honor those who fought for freedom, and our first liberator that we had record of are those of those indigenous people. And here we celebrate on the 1st of this month the freedom of Santa Marta at the hands of the indigenous peoples over 500 years ago, when the first vessel reached that coast and they founded the first Spanish city in the whole of Latin America, close to Santa Marta. That also has to do with how histories are being told. So there was a slave revolution and they fled. And they tried to pursue a different way of life, and they founded the village of San Basilio de Palenque. And this government recognized it a legitimate town because the elites of this hate that we support those who fought freedom. So we have to honor this heritage. Sometimes I say to North Americans, why bring the Statue of Liberty all the way to New York and we can install it in Cartagena resisted a siege for over a fighting for their freedom, being one of the cities most heavily affected by slavery, along with Havana and Veracruz, Mexico. And today, Havana, Veracruz, Mexico, and Cartagena are being governed by the people that believe in democracy, that believe this idea that Diogenes lantern should shine bright. So I just wanted to read history to come back to the present, because history convenience together. So out of Haiti, the first revolution under the flag of equality, fraternity, and solidarity. Here, my friend knows how to pronounce this in French better than I would. What says, but those who were fighting for that cause were also oppressive states. Back then, Washington was an oppressive state. And now, going back to our liberator in the same palace. And I can those who fought for the freedom of this country. We have the biggest contradiction. You cannot cry for freedom if you're oppressing others yourself. Here, allow me to that this palace used to be the home of Republican presidents of Colombia. Many oligarchs, like traders. 1851, once Bolívar and Santander passed away. They used to live here until they abandoned home. A home such as this, a home one that I didn't have it, that wanted to imitate France, but homes sometimes don't have a soul. So here in this very palace, we have seen a very simple room that used to be the room of the first president of the Republic of Colombia that we had. Our liberator, Simón Bolívar. He's not a liberator, he is an emancipator. He is the son of, but he knew how to dance with Afro-Colombians because apparently he knew how. Apparently, he, as many Colombians who have African ancestry and that carry dance and rhythm in their blood. So he was able to fuse two cultures. And there are other monuments such as Alhambra that fuse Arabic and Spanish culture. Back then, you could see the history that Arab women would throw rose petals from me, and these rose petals would fall into water fountains in the gardens. So out of those Arabs that were defeated militarily, and fuse their blood with the inhabitants of Spain, then we got sailors from Spain visit Caribbean coast. They were the first to Santa Marta and to Cartagena. And that's why Colombians also have Arab heritage. And we can say that we have all different types of blood in our veins. Arab blood can also come from sub-Saharan origins. This is ancestral blood that is over 3,000 years old. And sometimes we've been told there are movement fictions in the Americas, that there are certain regions in Latin America that are inaccessible by Latin America. So some Mexicans can even around Alcatraz state because they're not allowed to access their own territory. I even had a tense situation with President Trump in which I returned a plane with so-called deported immigrants. They were in chains, and I was outraged by this because I was thinking that slavery had ended. Didn't Bolivar say that we needed to free? Didn't Bolivar tell the founding father of the United States that we need to be free? Even though they were slaves, they didn't raise the flag of freedom before the French people. So that is a huge contradiction. We have liberators who turn slave traders. And when we talk about our Colombian flag, half of it reflects the Haitian flag. That was by Black peoples who were also slave traders. So we know that the Colombian flag comes from the Haitian flag, as well as the Venezuelan flag, the Ecuadorian flag. They are yellow, blue, and red. I think that history is what we've been told. That's why our flag reflects Haitian history. The flag brought over by Haitian generals. They were the first ones to design this flag. And after this flag became a sign of freedom. And here, it came triumphant, but it was also betrayed right here in the same home when our liberator Santander was victim of attempt. History says that Santander flew out of a window and he fled down that was around this property. He used to be in love with a Spanish princess who died here because she wasn't able to tolerate the climate here and climate conditions such as mosquitoes. So I can say that love saved him back then. And then he decided to free himself. You're more vulnerable, and he died alone. When you flee alone, you know that sometimes you're gonna have strength. So when we work alone, we are more vulnerable to death. So only when we join forces, we can be so. Here, we have some people from the Caribbean. The Caribbean is not a land of pirates. It's the land of freers, of rebels, with slave traders. And the Caribbean needs to remain free. Slaves, when they were brought from Africa, they will jump out of the vessels, swim to the shore. They founded their own nations along with some indigenous people called Garnes or Raíz population, having most of the islands of the Caribbean. And they will refuse to be enslaved. They were never slaves. They have a perception of life. We are also Caribbeans, and we also island in the Caribbean is called San Andres, founded by free peoples. And because they were free, they joined to Colombia because they saw the land of freedom here in Colombia. Someone promised full freedom of slaves in America, and they didn't fulfill their promise. We are victims of new slavery. Migrants are sometimes living under terrible conditions. We've been gaining terrain in the organization of American States, who is here present. She is a Colombian, and she's an expression of that. We were not defeated, but now the Inter-American human rights system that was our torch, I am I was elected president thanks to them, fell under different administration. And it was due to a rupture of progressive government in the continent that we are still the majority, that we were able, even though we fight, we lost the efficiency or the spirit of the inter-American human rights system. Priorities changed, and we cannot lose the idea of freedom embodied by all of these Caribbean nations. We need to be united, and we still have the memory of Grand Colombia, the great nation that we need to rebuild. If the Latin American region reunites, it's because the Grand Colombia came together to work together. And if the Grand Colombia is divided, Latin America will never be able to integrate because they are opposing forces and there are certain dialectics that are being applied. So yes, we need to help Haiti as they back then. And what we were told by Mr. Che Guevara, one of the most universal Argentinian citizens, where you see injustice, we have to fight against it. It doesn't matter where in the world. That was something attempted by Bolivar. Anywhere in the world there is injustice, we need to fight it because we stop being human beings. And the message by Che Guevara is still present by ourselves. Only inhuman people will label Che Guevara as a murderer. Justice and the right to rebellion is necessary when in the face of tyranny. And nowadays we're being governed by tyranny. Those who used to be the Democrats become slave traders. So the paradox of Haiti, whose Napoleon army was defeated in Haiti, our battles against the Spaniards cannot be compared to the rebellion of former slaves in Haiti against the Napoleonic state. And that's why Macron was angry that a president from the South, came to teach him that you can be sitting in Paris and turn your face to injustice. I love France, of course. I'm very fond of them because those of us on the left wing of Colombia believe us to be French or be heavily French influenced, and we learned French. And most of the most important revolutions started in France. They're no longer in fashion, but I hope that we have a revolution. But now the focus is here in Latin America, and we're not French. But of course, we have the longest line of descendants of the Roman Empire. But here, we also have vengeance and love, as Bolivar lived in this very same house. And this is a contradiction faced by the Italians as well. We are also facing that contradiction. But yes, let me not delve into that. But I want to say that we're the heritage of the Roman Empire, but we're also descendants from ancient cultures, ancient Latin American cultures. Although we shouldn't be called Latin America because we were not of Latin origin. We represent the world's diversity. Anyone who lives in Bogota or in any region can find a man or a woman who reflects ethnicities from all over the world. And that's who we are as a people. So we can interact, we can belong to mankind. And that's why we try to reach agreements. We try to avoid war and conflicts unless we are forced to it, as we were to do it with North Korea. Since 1948 to this date, 700,000 Colombians have been murdered due to political reasons and due to greed. And sometimes for a passion or love. Sometimes we died of love by ourselves. And that was reflected in the Nobel of our Nobel Prize, 100 Years of Solitude, that reflects 100 years of conflict of people that has been affected by civil war. And the only way in which we can attain peace and beauty is to stop being isolated as peoples. We have isolated because we see 700,000 assaulted in our history. It's almost 10 times the number of victims of Gaza. Our children have also perished. We've also been victims of bombardings over our peasant people. So one president who was a descendant of slave traders, that in order to extinguish communists and to avoid having a second Cuban revolution, they needed to bombard farmers' associations. And we replicated the scenario that Guernica of Spain, Guernica. And then those affected people fled to the mountains, and they wanted to overthrow the oligarchical state. And they almost win the revolution, but due to the vices of the fighters, they were not able to achieve their goals. We also had our Nobel Peace Prize, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, to Colombia, try to defend freedom, try to defend books. So those who support killings, who support death as descendants of Latin Americans, end up perpetrating horrible crimes. So here we're hoping to end our solitude, our isolation, and that's why we want to come together with the whole of Latin America, with the whole of humanity, and have a dialogue with President Trump, because he has refused to talk to us. But of course, we have to talk to the Americans, because they will be here for thousands of years to come, and we will be here for thousands of years to come. So we have to understand each other by using the way of dialogue, as opposed to using the language of bombs. South America has a huge potential for renewable agencies, so they can decarbonize the whole of the energy, full of the fossil energy matrix of the United States. And this is something that we're not talking about, and that will solve to a great extent the issue of the climate crisis, and that will protect life. But we're not having the conversation. The United States, they do not believe in climate change, and we see how they've been affected by floodings in Texas. And even in the capital of capitalism, where at the downtown area in Brooklyn and Down Street, you can smell marijuana being smoked. When they kill 1 million of Latin Americans in the war against drug because they were exporting cannabis. So we bear the death and they enjoy the pleasure. So that is a huge paradox. And they want to continue killing us, exterminating us, and we are defending life, and we need to speak up. And now I move forward to Gaza, and then I will end my speech. But of course, history is infinite. It never ends. Okay, so we have experienced Gaza in our blood. We have also been invaded. Some Colombians might be outraged when the peoples who have been suppressed by tyrants rebel. We can criticize Hamas, but we cannot criticize the Palestinian people. They do have a right to rebellion because their land was occupied. Our Colombian lands have been occupied twice. Once by Spaniards a long time ago. Some of our islands were occupied by the British, by the French, and Panama was also occupied by North Americans. And they took away our territory. It is lucky that we didn't disappear. And an occupied nation deserves to rebel. Rebellion is not a political crime. It's only a political crime when it affects the tyrant. And now they name the rebels terrorists. Those who engage in rebellion are not criminals. I was almost once prevented from raising the flag from Bolivar, which was green and black, and Bolivar was carrying this flag in his fight against Spain. And General Murillo ended up having a conversation with Simon Bolivar. But they continue the war, but they brought a human perspective to the war. And that's why we still have Spaniards living amongst us, because they also have a right to life. So back then, Bolivar understood the rights and the dignity of his opponents, the Spanish opponents who didn't want to return to Spain. But what this flag represented was freedom or death. And I don't know where he came with this idea of this flag, because Bolivar ride his horse through all over this country. And in the back then, Spain wanted to be Republican, such as Colombia. And Bolivar left these flags that were red and black, or green and black. And that is what represent freedom or death. And because we don't want to talk about that, we'll say freedom or freedom. So that flag loses its black color and it turns in red. So here we want to stand for freedom and the protection of life. Europe went to a very difficult time after defeating Hitler. And now they are electing Hitler's sons and daughters. And they are repeating what was back then the speech of Hitler. We are superior if we are white, and we reject everyone who has a different skin color than ours. When that is what Hitler was doing back then. How would it be possible that partisan peoples of Italia would adopt similar speeches? They have all types of people, Christian, communists, and those who survived the Republican Spain. And those who first marched in a liberated France were anarchists. An anarchist movement who was defeated in the past, and then that they were enjoying freedom against the enemies of freedom.
Where is Europe now? So we have a series of tasks and questions that we have to fulfill. The largest mass grave is not in Latin America, but in the Mediterranean, precisely where democracy was created, or at least the word as such, in Athens. filled with corpses of migrants trying to reach Europe. But why they have migration? Because they made the world poorer with the colonies. They are the ones that empower the others, so they are the slaughters of the humanity. And the way out to leave these and to get the flags again, the better flags again, say that the progress must reach the south. Africa can also decarbonify the energy matrix of Europe. And Chinese are doing an immense effort as well. I have seen that from our side, but I decided to put Colombia in the Silk Route because we weren't threatened or insulted there. Hope it goes well. And now we are part of the universe. We're part of the world. Now we are not so lonely. Now we can leave the violence. The Mediterranean, where we have the Palestine, because Mediterranean is plural, where Jesus was born, who was a Palestine. The place where he was born is under threat, and it's Palestine. And we don't understand that. That message now from Jesus is that there are no chosen people in Palestine, not the Jewish people. It was a religion, not an ethnicity, because they were Palestine as well. They were born in Palestine. Not the Christian white from the United States. They are not the chosen people. From the voice of Jesus when he took the sellers from the temple, the peddlers from the temple, he decided that the chosen people of God is humanity, is the only ones with a thinking brain, thinking of what we have thought about the universe. That's why we are the chosen people. We all are the chosen people. Doesn't kill with each other. The day that every human being is free in the planet, there will be no wars. We think on the stars, ad astra, as the Romans said. We said ad astra too. And humanity moves around the universe bringing life. And the inert world is going to become something vital, thinking with a free brain, helping each other. And it will be our destiny if we defeat today's barbaric, heinous situation. And this is done only if Palestine is free. We met with the Palestinian guerrilla from the Palestinian Liberation Front, the movement April 19th, the Bolivarian movement, and we trained together and we learned things together. And it was in the desert of Batraba in Libya where Gaddafi was alive. And the Swapo from Namibia, who is here, was there. And they were part of the National African Council. And they were from the Polisario front that spoke Spanish, Arab, because it's another people that were conquered, and Greeks. So a series of guys, because none of them were old, they gathered together from Latin American, Panamanian, and from Africa and the Middle East to train us for a war. Finally, we ended up making peace, dialectically speaking. Mandela, Arafat, M19 in Colombia, and almost all the Latin American guerrillas. We gathered together to prepare for a war, and we ended up creating a peace for the world. And that's where Palestine were with us. Nobody has wrote that book. I have asked people from the M19, the still surviving ones, to write it because part of this history, because tells different things. That progressive men and women are universal. It's not something from a this small place. They got together with the world. They crossed the ideas of fight against tyranny. 2 of my friends died there. 2 of the dearest, Edna and Laura, who was completely tore apart, and he was a poet. And I tried to recover his poetry and his songs. I tried to have someone on the internet to put it in new technologies. I'm Francisco Vargas. And many died, but there are some still alive. Why don't we write a book that is a book of world solidarity from rebellion? And a member of the M19 is a president, and now we are sons and officers of Bolivar. Officers of Bolivar, one stepped into the front. Vanquish or die. Now it's vanquish only, as Bolivar said eventually. We have to vanquish, we have to win. So we have to make calls, tough ones, facing dark times. I was betrayed in this palace. Again, history is repeated again, because I said that not a single ton was going to move to kill Palestine. My government, white officers coming from Labists, took making the idea of this innocuous. It wasn't Drummond. They took advantage of this, but the one that did this were paid by the Colombian people and in other ministries. So very Santander, they set a trap, the same that when Santander Bolivar in the 2nd floor of this home. The tradition that we have in each other, solitude maybe started that day when Santander was going to kill Bolivar. Then it was saved by a woman, by Manuelita, who was Ecuadorian, and from Leper, they said. And we are not revindicating Manuelita's science, revindicating Policarpa Salabarrieta, who was the first guerrilla lady in Colombia, on top of some indigenous that even infatuated some Spaniards, because all the ways of fight, of struggle are possible. So saved us, and I hope that they can save us again, because we're about to being extinguished again. The front line in the fight for life, I hope. They ride a horse like Manuelita that said that she was the Turkey loved ones. They did the lives, and Manuelita and some others, those generals, is the time, because the woman is the one that takes life for life. We have to do that. We're going to be together. Select meeting is going to be in Sparta. Is the first place was conquered and the place of freedom. Say to the our European friends, Zelensky. So I think that a war among brothers should not the Slavic people, and they are killing each other. So they are killed and a place where else are taken somewhere else. What do we tell to Europe? What do we tell to NATO? The 2 military blocs that were created for another reason in history, the Pact of Versailles, that now we have NATO, and the Pact of NATO, many of the countries we are half members weren't even received We were begging to be there, so they are called like strategic partners. What do we do in NATO? If the main chiefs of NATO are sided with genocide, what do we do there? It's not a time to have a military reset of the government, of the world. There is not a Latin American army. Can't we have a Salvation Army for humankind? That makes the value the ideas worth. Because we learned that this was a military and political at the same time. Hegel said that first we have the ideas, then the cannons. Otherwise, the ideas are just fodder for mice. We don't write books for nobody to read. We write them, and beautiful, but they are meant to become a reality. The one that creates, as they said. This fantasy has become reality, and Aureliano is ruling Colombia now. And we have moved the young butterflies. Here we are, the heart of the biodiversity of the planet. And here we have a story older than the United States, creating realities. We left the reality, and now we are thinking with the world. The ones that were beheading the kings now are kissing us and hugging us. There is another reality on motion that we have created in our dreams. Caribbean created dreams that became truth. The Caribbean calls us to dream, but also to make the dream true. What do we do in NATO? Is it a time for another military alliance? Because how can we side with armies that send bombs to children? Those are not liberation armies. Those are darkness armies. So we need to have light armies. We need to gather our armies and think the things properly, because we cannot have Israeli weapons, and they are arriving here. And the Ministry of, and these house in the Chancellor's office and other ministries, even officers that were so-called communist, helped to put obstacles to the president with a two-word figure that I can't remember the name, that made empty the prohibition of exporting coal. And Glencore and Drummond are taking 60% of the coal that Israel needs, because we are the 5th coal exporters of the world, and the world of law and the country of Libya wants to kill humanity. I don't want to export coal, and nor to explore more gas. And the last oil reserves are being depleted, because that kills the humanity and kills everybody. And we are forbidding this exporting, and we have traps within the same government. And the Chancellor has the order of changing this decree at once. Forbidden. We have some magistrates that are not understanding my words or the new reality of the world, and defeat the present orders. I'm facing a lawfare, as many people know. The more persecuted person of a country is the president. I said that I'm also a slave myself. I went to write my book with a yellow bougainville with a beautiful sea, and they said that I was with the largest delinquent of Ecuadorians, and they were trying to kill me in the press that tells lies, because they are owned by the rich ones. We have to leave NATO. There is no other path to follow. And the relationship with Europe cannot go with people that help. Other European people are not helping, with European governments that are betraying their own people, and they are helping to throw bombs. And Colombian coal is not going to become bombs in Israel to kill children. If they are going to raise our tariffs, other people will help us and they will buy our products. Colombia buys Palestine olive oil, not to Israel. Palestine make it, Israel put the brand. Colombia buys to Palestine and don't sell to Israel. Not because we hate Israel. I believe in the two-state solution. I'm from that solution. I think that the world allows Jewish for some years and people coming from Arabs because they have some Arab heritage that was in the Bible. So they call us anti-Semites, religious terms. And when I read where Zen was, it says that it's a descendant both of people that were called from Arab people and some others from the Jewish. And it was the same people. Jewish and Arabs in Palestine is the same people and they have the same origin. They don't have to kill each other because they will find only the solitude that Jesus found when the Romans that were not from there killed him. Well, from NATO, we have to leave it. We have to set up an army of light with all the people of the world that wants it. And we have to tell Europe that if they want to be with Latin America or Africa, they must stop helping Nazis. And we have to tell to the North American people with all colors to stop helping Nazis. There was a coalition of government, the coalition of light. Some were Reds, and they had this flag, and they arrived before anybody else. And Hitler died, killing himself. And some others were bearing their red bars, and came also almost to Berlin. And some others were the people of Europe fighting with the cold, with Hitler, and some others were the Chinese. And it was the same fighting against Hitler and their partners and releasing their country. And some other people did the same. We did a great world coalition for humanity. Hitler died. His ideas are still permeating the dark armies. But why aren't we creating an army of light? Because in the end, if they don't pay attention to us, if our call to dialogue doesn't stop bombs, if Guernica continues everywhere, I know how tough are these words because a former magistrate from Cauca was attacked, and Cauca was of his leave and was a part of freedom. We're going to extract. They were asking Mossad to take the president of Colombia by force. Well, you might try. A woman saved Bolivar. Maybe that happens to me too. But we cannot be silent. Salvation Army, that ideas are not taken by rats. And these armies starts in the Caribbean or another part of the world. We have to be together so that they respect us. It doesn't happen to us. We can surrender the weapons. Al-Fatah did that. Nelson Mandela did that. Many of the ones that leave the search stop using weapons. We use our words. We use magnificent examples of peace, but they have to respect us. Our voice is not a clown voice. Our voice is respected, and those that are bombing have to respect it, and that is military and political as well. And we had to. And if it's only political, let's hope that we don't use the military part. But we had to. Then our Hague group has to go beyond too. Has to go beyond. Otherwise, it's not going to stop the genocide in the world. And the barbaric thing is going to continue. We want a population-free world, and we want all to be free. So it's up to us. And I finished shouting, "Free Palestine! Long life, free Palestine!"
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you so much, estimated President. the heinous crimes are going to be stopped with the intervention of the President of the Republic of Colombia, Gustavo Petro. We finished this thing of the emergency meeting on Palestine in Bogota. Hope you have a great end of day for all of you.